Welcome everyone to Frost Sullivan 2025 Cybersecurity webinar series. So our series, our session are designed to give the CISO and others like security professionals insight into the related trends, the challenges and strategies into the cybersecurity, so you can understand the threat landscape and so you have the ability to protect the organization better. So my name is An-Tien Vu. I'm a principal analyst at Frost Sullivan cybersecurity team. Right, I'm leading our global cloud and application security research, and I will be the moderator today. Right. So before we dive in, I would like to ask our speakers today. We have the three speakers to give some a brief introduction about themselves. So first, can I start with Mick? Mick, can you give an introduction about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Tien. Yeah, so I'm Mick McCulley. I'm a field CTO over at Oligo. Been in the software space for a little over 3 decades. Security probably a little over a couple of decades. So it's been a fun journey. It actually started with DAST and SAST, but I've dabbled with a little bit of everything from mobile network data, and most recently on the developer side before Oligo. So excited about today's topic. Like I think like having this discussion and promoting industry awareness is definitely a positive thing.
Perfect, thank you. Next, Daniel, can you introduce yourself?
So hi everyone, my name is Daniel. I'm the co-founder and CEO here at Migo. I started my career in the Israeli intelligence, did over a decade of cyber. So, you know, from a researcher all the way to the group leader, saw the quite outstanding involvement in technologies and the attacker mindset, I would call it, over the past few years. After that, I actually joined a consulting firm called McKinsey, where I had an opportunity to work with some of the most amazing organizations on their technical strategy, including the risk strategy and cybersecurity strategy. And then I joined my amazing co-founder, Itai, in order to build Migo and create this proactive application protection.
Perfect. Thank you. And finally, Aviv.
Thank you. So I'm Aviv, a co-founder and CEO of Codem. My background comes especially from cyber, like most of my career, both from the offensive side as a offensive security researcher, and also on the defensive side, and specialized a lot in the application layer. And this is what led us to eventually build Codem.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the introduction, everyone. So before we get into the discussion, right, I want to set the stage for today's conversation. So as you know, that over the past decade, right, more than 10 years, so we have seen the application security has evolved, right, dramatically, right, from static point-in-time scanning to more innovative and runtime-centric moment, right? However, so we still see that the organization continue or still struggle, right, to deal with the real threat, right, for the applications. So we also see that the cloud native adoption, the faster development life cycles, and the AI-driven governance and so on, making the threat landscape larger and sort of more complex, right? We continue to see that traditional application testing tools, for example, DAST, SAST, and SCA and so on, are still very, very essential in the application security. But organizations, so realize one thing that they often miss something that is happening inside the application. What is really happening or in the real time, right, in the production environment, right? So this creates a lot of challenges for security teams, especially for the SecOps teams, right, to detect and prioritize the risks and the threats, investigate and respond to them effectively and quickly. So that's the reason why today we want to discuss about ADR, right? Very emerging and disruptive technology in the application security industry. So that's the reason why the session today will cover the following agenda. We will discuss a little bit about the agenda, about the key challenges that organizations are facing in the cloud application security. We also discuss a little bit about the implementation of current application security testing, right? And also the other security solution, for example, CNAPP or like even cloud security or even like a runtime security solution like RASP or WAF, right? We also touch a bit upon that. And of course, we also discuss about the definition of ADR, what it is, and also like how it can help organization to change the game to transform the application security operations, and sort of how can it be integrated with the SecOps, current SecOps workflow, and so how to improve the threat management, right? So that is our agenda today, and I hope that you will be enjoying the session. We have a very interactive session, right, to discuss about this this very interesting topic. So okay, so with that, to begin our discussion, let's start by looking at the very, real world obstacles that organizations are facing right now with question one. I want to set up answer question one right now. So in general, what do you think about the key challenges that organizations are facing right now in application security, especially for the application threat management, right? So maybe with this question, can I start with Mick first, right? Mick, can you share the thought?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and thanks, Tian, for that background. It's interesting to me because I think that the challenge that we're going to talk today is one that's it's spanned the entire sort of evolution of application, and it's just been accepted, right? Like I think this is the reality of sort of the situation, the technology that was historically existed, but applications when they're running have just been a blind spot. Like organizations spend a lot of time building, even testing applications, going through deployment processes. And then once the application's live, you kind of have to just sit on your hands and wait and see, right? Like look to see if an attacker was successful and were able to actually abuse the application and try to chase them after the fact. So I think it's been historically a blind spot. And that's one of the areas that excited me most about this space, the ADR, is the fact that a very difficult thing to solve is now we're starting to provide visibility into it. And you mentioned a couple of things, like organizations have historically taken approaches to say, can we discover and find these weaknesses early in advance? And it's definitely still a valid approach. And even building things like in runtime with WAFs, right? Trying to proactively discover the attack vectors and block them, but you need to know those in advance in order for that to be successful. And then RASP, right? RASP was probably the one that came closest to solving this problem, but on its own, like had some barriers of entry that I think, like utopian world, it would be everywhere. The reality is I think there was some hindrances to the technology that was based on at the time that allowed it to be widely adopted. And I think that's probably one of the more exciting areas, is that like there's some new technology that I know all of us are using that is allowing us to actually solve this problem in a much more effective way, to actually provide this level of guidance. And also one of the other interesting pieces that you mentioned was the runtime components, right? The looking at the cloud native applications and all of the infrastructure associated with it. What's intriguing to me is there's probably no organization out there today that doesn't have something to look at the security of those components. But if you peel back the onion just a little bit, it's like the only reason that infrastructure exists most likely is to run the application, is actually to provide sort of the compute cycles for the application, which is the core component of what the business is trying to achieve. So this, I think, is starting to give an area of visibility, awareness, and detection and protection that hasn't existed one step earlier in the kill chain than most people are used to. So that I think is one of the biggest challenges that this is starting to help organization address. It is that it's just the blind spot piece. Ken, you're muted.
Thanks so much, Mick.
I knew one of us would do that. I knew one of us. I almost caught myself. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. Mick, do you have any idea to share about this? Daniel?
So I agree with Mick. I think that the blind spot is one of the key challenges. I think that, you know, when we're talking with our customers and prospects, I think that there is one big challenge that really kind of, I think, amplified over the last few years, which is the speed of attacks and the speed of weaponization. Because if I really need to kind of, you know, pursue this one big challenge, I think it's the shrinking of the breach window. You know, we used to live in a world where we could, as Mick said, you know, we could do the work, do the detection, and hopefully wait for the patch to happen, wait for the fix to happen. But now we don't have time anymore. We don't have time to continue in showing the problem, waiting for somebody to solve them, because attackers are, you know, already start exploiting them. We're seeing this window getting shorter and shorter and shorter by the day, where, you know, we're talking about minutes in the last few weeks. And I think the teams, what we're seeing, are really looking for the ability to create both the ability to create proactive decision making, but also proactive protection while they're fixing the problem. Because in this time, and again, following back on this, it's both about the ability to identify the blind spot, but very, very, very quickly understand, okay, what can I do while we're fixing it, and not, you know, just waiting for the attacker to exploit it. And for me, this is probably the biggest challenge that we are trying to address, and we're seeing our customer trying to address.
Okay, so Daniel will talk about the speed, right? The speed for detection and also like how to fix the issues. How about Aviv? What do you think about this the challenges that the organization facing today?
I couldn't agree more with what Daniel said about the speed and the pace. And eventually, we live in a world that every organization wants to be more efficient and execute faster. I think that this like speed problem comes from a major challenge, which is the gap between like theory and reality. We scan code, we find thousands, tens of thousands of potential issues. But when something dangerous happens in production, usually it's often invisible until it's too late. And especially in a cloud-native, AI-driven environment, attack surfaces shift hourly, the application changes constantly, and security teams are unable to chase that manually, especially in the application layer. And the unique thing about the ADR approach is the merging code insights with real-time context, with runtime context. So we're able to know instantly which threats matter, which can wait, and how should we act on it.
Yeah, we haven't discussed about the definition of ADR because we just touched on the challenges, general challenges. Just so we talk about challenges right now, but in this period, what do you think about the awareness, right? Like among all organizations or like the client that you are talking to, what are the gaps, right? The gaps in organization in terms of understanding, in terms of awareness, and also in terms of the technology deployment, right? When it comes to addressing application security challenges when they are facing. And where do you see the biggest blind spot in the current stack of the tools used to secure their applications? So there are two kind of questions here: the understanding, awareness, and also the gaps in using the technology solution to address these challenges. Yeah, maybe we can go with Aviv first. Aviv, any idea to share?
Sure. So I think that the big and blind spot is that most organizations think, and we see that in application security, that more tools equal more security. And in reality, what happens is that they end up with fragmented scanners, with WAFs, with monitoring tools, that engineers on board, that security teams on board. Those tools don't talk to each other, and eventually that creates silos. And for example, like developers can see code issues, SecOps will see alerts, but no one sees the full picture. And this is where the unification of the greatest visibility from every phase in the development lifecycle, the ability to correlate those phases across from code phase to runtime, is what gives us the ability to manage the risk. And this is part of what we're lacking today.
So I can correlate that it would be a risk. You need to correlate the risk and also the threat, right, in size. Not only just a risk inside, right? Okay, perfect. Daniel, and your thought on this?
Yeah, so I think then is exactly what you said before, and I agree very much with Aviv, because it's all about the risk. I think that for many organizations we're talking with, application security for many times equals scanning code. And I think that we're living in a world where we cannot think about application as something static. And you cannot think about application as, it's just code, because it's not about the code. It's about what the attacker can do about this code and how can they actually execute an attack. And I think the runtime context of the application risk essentially comes from how the code runs and how the network so-called enables somebody to use this code. And so the question that ADR allows you to answer, or that we think that you should answer with your tools is this vulnerable, or is it like the vulnerable library or the code is actually being executed? Yes or no, right? Is the application actually accessible from the internet? Is it authenticated? Is it protected by a WAF? Yes or no? And of course, as we mentioned, it's all about the risk. What's the business context of this application? And I think once you have this, going back to what Aviv mentioned, I think then you can actually identify what you need to do. But then the next question is, okay, what controls can I put in place right now to close the exposure while I'm fixing the issue? And I think that this is kind of where we're seeing the gap with the tools, because they don't allow you to address this in this proactive manner, not to mention that, essentially leaving you with many of these problems and not helping you solve the problems, which is, going back to the speed is the only way today.
Yeah, I agree. Nick, you wrap up this question?
Yeah, it's always fun to go third because the other guys always like to follow the responses, but it's absolutely right. Visibility, contextual risk, and then the mitigating controls piece. But the interesting part, I think, to me, is the whole reason all three of us are answering this question is what I've encountered is there's not a deep level knowledge in the industry yet that this is even that the capabilities that we're talking about is possible. So there's a lot of organizations that are content to keep doing a lot of the things that they do today. It's working. It may not allow them to actually achieve what they're trying to do with reducing risk and addressing these backlogs and understanding real risk, identifying unknown vulnerabilities. And so just promoting the fact that these new technologies, these new approaches give a layer of visibility and intelligence to solve these problems, just as Aviv and Daniel mentioned, right? The fact that you can see inside the code, see the behaviors, know what it's doing, know when it's misbehaving, and then implement mitigating controls inside of the application. I think there's still not an abundance of awareness that this is possible. And that struggle, right, then leads us to the fact that this is where we see, and this is what we're trying to overcome in part of these conversations, is making everybody aware that you can solve these and tackle some of these problems that have been historically a challenge in a completely different way. It makes you rethink some of your security processes and controls and how you implement them. But they have, and we believe, I think collectively, that this is going to have a huge impact on the ability to address a lot of these issues, especially with some of the things that Aviv and Daniel mentioned, the speed of attacks. It changes your ability to actually react. If there's no fix available, if it's an unknown vulnerability, what do you do? With AI and the fact that there's challenges associated with it in organizations' adoption, but the adversaries are using it just as effectively. Both of those start to contribute to the fact that you've got narrow windows, you need better approaches, and you need to have controls in order to actually stop these instead of just chasing attackers after they're successful.
Well, we talk a lot about what I call the risk and also the application. I mean, the traditional scanning tools. I think Aviv and mentioned about the risk, right? And so scanning the code in there. So now let's discuss a little bit around some specific kind of tools, right, for the application security testing. I think that there are the tools that are still being used by a lot of organizations right now for the application security, right? So let's talk about the challenges and the limitation of the current like application security testing tools, including SAST, DAST, or even like the new one, ASPM, right, and a CNAPP as well. So, like, if the company can argue that, hey, we have the runtime application runtime security solution, for example, WAF and so RASP, but we all know that this solution have their limitation. They are not the bullet, right, silver bullet to address this as a runtime security, right, as challenges. So my question is, from your experience, where are the key limitation of this solution in application risk and threat management? We can go from like a AppSec testing tool, for example, SAST that, and even like a ASPM, right? A little bit about that, and also some runtime security like WAF and RASP. Maybe we can go with Daniel first.
Yes, so I think, in application security, like any other security overall, I don't think there is one silver bullet in order to to catch everything up.
Yeah.
But I do think that the tools that you mentioned, and I think we kind of touched on some of them in the previous question, like Aviv talked about some of them, Mick talked about some of them. But I think that the overarching limitation that we're seeing is really the ability to understand the modern application, like runtime context. Because modern applications are not just code, they're not just requests, they're not just syscalls, and they are distributed. They're built on multiple APIs. They're leveraging a lot of open source packages and third-party components that all working together to essentially, to provide just one flow of code. And this is a major change from the application we were all writing and kind of building, even 6-7 years ago. So there was a major change in the technology we used that essentially leaves a lot of those solutions kind of that focus only on one part of the application, really lacking or as we call it before, blinded to the actual context of what's going on, when this request is being sent to this endpoint. What actually was the cause of, this syscall that was triggered by this library that is not even mine. And I think that, those tools, because of this lack of context, because of those blind spots, creating a lot of alerts and a lot of detection, and essentially a lot of noise, which are really hard to distill because of this lack of context. Because, okay, I saw an anomaly in the application, or I saw a vulnerability somewhere. What does it mean? Where did it come from? What does it allow an attacker to do? While essentially the real threats can go unnoticed. Mick mentioned before, what happens with a library that just one day, became, it's a vulnerability. Nobody knew about it the day before. So these are the exact things that, those limitations, these blind spots actually don't allow you to even see. And I think when we kind of started, also as a company, this was the limitation that ADR was born to address, to connect essentially the modern application, different dots, and understand how you can have comprehensive context to first and foremost create visibility into how your application actually works, how the application is actually behaving, and then essentially to give context into, whatever other tools are creating, because we're not living in a silo ourselves. We're part of a bigger ecosystem, as I mentioned. I don't think ADR is also the single silver bullet. But essentially, how can we take them, help you understand what you need to solve, but also provide you this unique new insights about those, anomalies in the application, and give you the root cause analysis on, okay, where it come from and what does it mean for your organization right now in order for you to act on it very, very quickly.
Yeah, Mick, can you share on this? I think that like what Deanna was saying, that we have an older traditional application testing and so ADR. We can see them as like a two sides of a coin, right? So we cannot live each other. We're gonna stay away from each other. But this is very like intertwined and so interconnected. You need to have what I call the ship security with all the application codes testing in there, and so the runtime context to really understand what is actually happening inside the application. Right? That's what I heard from you, Daniel. Yeah. Mick, anything to share?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And what's probably very interesting too is like, because Daniel used the word context or contextual. And that to me, when we start talking about ADR, isn't just a singular definition. There's so many implementations or utilization of contextual piece. There is like, what's your risk? Like as Daniel mentioned, like understanding the behaviors. Like there's so many other elements of just the contextual piece. I also think that like when you start looking at some of these tools in this risk management, they address it from different meanings. Like you've got on the left side more proactive, and we've talked about it's more theoretical in nature, and you're trying to get ahead of stuff. But the complexities of modern apps sometimes make that very difficult. Like we mentioned microservices. Now you got code scattered all over the place. I've seen instances where, you know, build engines make decisions and code gets added and removed during those processes. And so those historical static approaches lose their ability, or code that's dynamically loaded inside of a running application. So if you're not like on top of it, like observing it and looking to see exactly what it's doing at any given time, that's the definition of a blind spot. And so, and I know we'll probably chat about this later, so I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but like AI brings that to a whole escalated layer. And I've seen some of these conversations, and it's a very intriguing one that should be somewhat scaring a lot of people in organizations, because real-time observation becomes unbelievably critical in order to actually know exactly what's going on. It's not only to help you with the proactive side with ASPM, it's unbelievably important to actually give you the context of that, because without the context, all you're doing is grouping a whole bunch of things together. The context actually gives you sort of the imperative nature, the real risk associated with it, which is unbelievably important to actually be effective with ASPM. And even with all of the runtime and the other sort of capabilities on the CNAPP piece, like finding live attacks is fantastic. You can give that to a SOC, but they're going to run into a brick wall when they can't figure out why that actually started in the first place. Like, where did the attack actually originate? And unless you have this layer of visibility, you lose that additional context and have no idea. You don't know what controls to put into place because you don't know how the actual attack originated. So these all sort of, it's again a single term, but there's so many sort of definitions of how it can actually deliver additional value to organization.
Yeah, thanks, me. Have you?
I agree with both Mick and Daniel, and I wanna like touch on what Daniel said, that the applications today, like the way that we write applications today is completely different than a couple of years ago, 5 years ago, a decade. And I'm sure that like with how AI changes now everything about engineering, like next year we'll see a completely different applications. But it's not just about the applications. It's about the entire software development lifecycle. The toolchain that you mentioned, like the SAST and the DAST and the ASPMs and different, like they fit certain development habits and certain like types of SDLCs that we all know. But those things change as well. It's not just the applications. And I think that what happens now with context creation, right? Not just in ADR, but also like in infrastructure security, cloud security, network security. Like the more context that we're able to create and the more accurate it is, it's also the opportunity for us to leverage and just recreate these toolings entirely again. What we've seen with our customers, that they were able, using just context, recreate the value they're getting from SAST and SCAs, and the way that they leverage those type of tools and the less friction now that it creates to engineers to be able and deploy. And it will, like my prediction, it will even be more important in a fully AI-powered engineering groups.
Sure, we discussed a bit about the AI application, AI native application and sort of cloud native application later on, right? But before we touch on those things, let's discuss about the definition of ADR. So Mick mentioned that, okay, there's no like one definition of ADR, right? Because we may treat ADR in a different way. So I wanted to ask you, so what is actually ADR, right? How do you define ADR? Because I think that there are a lot of confusion right now, right, when it comes to the ADR, because whenever I talk to like one customer, they said, okay, we heard about CDR, we heard about the NDR, we heard about EDR, but we haven't heard about ADR, right? And so there are a lot of like DR right now. So we also have the CD, container detection response, and Kubernetes detection response, and a lot of like everything XDR. Okay, so just like give us the definition, or like understand a little bit about the definition of ADR. Right, who can go first? Maybe Mick.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a swag at it, but we'll definitely like the other two's input. And I'm a big fan. Like, I'm mechanical engineer by degree, so it was hammered into me early on in my career, the whole KISS principle, which is the keep it simple, stupid, for lack of a better. So I'm always a big fan of like just simplifying as much as possible, and we're very guilty in security of using all kinds of acronyms, right? And I think there is some confusion. Matter of fact, I've had these conversations just the last 2 days of differences between CNAPP and EDR, and the easiest way is to, I think, just to narrow it down, because the ability to solve some of those same problems, there is overlap, right? It definitely starts to dabble in some of those other areas. And the intriguing part about CNAPP, that whole acronym itself, is there's this huge A right in the middle, which is,
I agree,
very intriguing to me, because it's like none of the solutions have any idea what's going on in the application. So it's like it should be SNP, right, without the A actually in there. But like, I believe like the whole idea of ADR is this ability to see inside the app. Like that's it. And again, we use this term contextual, and the contextual means is all based upon the fact that you're seeing the code in real time. You're knowing what it's doing, how it's working, because that is what gives you or delivers that contextual understanding of, applications have to interact with networks. They have to interact with data. They have to perform activities. Knowing if it's the logging mechanism with a vulnerability that is now executing code on your server is extremely important, versus just the application performing normal activities. EDRs won't have that context. CNAPP might not have that context. Again, they can look for telltale signs of an attacker, but you can't find it one step earlier in that kill chain. So ADR to me is about this layer of getting inside of the app. Once you're in there, you can now start to make decisions, understand what's happening, and implement mitigating controls to say, I don't want this to occur, right? Instead of chasing a crypto installation after the fact, let me block that from actually happening inside of the application, so I can stop it one step earlier in the kill chain. So ADR to me is just literally getting inside of the app. But again, there's applicability to actually helping solve a lot of other problems that are side effects associated with the fact that that was successful. I said I was going to keep it simple, but it's a application visibility. Yeah.
So it's like a function to function as a behavior of all those like live package or like a running code in the application in there, right? And is that like the biggest difference between ADR and other solutions that we just discussed about? Like I mean the SAST or the DAST or like even CNAPP you mentioned. Yeah. Daniel, or any?
So I'll go. I can go. Yeah, I think that what Mick said about looking at the inside. We believe in it so much. We called our company Migo. Migo in Aramic is from the inside. This is the meaning of Migo. Migo is from the inside, understanding things from the inside out. So I totally agree, because I think that the amazing thing, I think, that the detection and response approach brought to the world, and we can all think about 10 years ago when companies like CrowdStrike disrupted the world of antiviruses for endpoints. It was all about the ability to stop thinking about the world just on like signature-based things or configuration analysis, and really understanding behavior from the inside the system. And I think application became such a complex system that, as we mentioned, ADR is all about the ability to very, 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 in like high resolution, understand essentially what's going on inside the application. Does the baseline make sense? And having even the ability to talk about a baseline of an application and how it actually behaves, because as we mentioned, it's so complex today. But then to ask the question, okay, for any deviation from the baseline, what is it? Is it just a drift because we're living in a fast-growing world and the applications just keep changing? Is this drift actually, makes sense or doesn't make sense from a risk perspective? But mainly, is this deviation actually something that requires us to act because it might be an attack? And so for us, totally agree. Again, naming our company as from the inside is we cannot say that we don't agree more. And it's all about the ability to really have this hyper contextual layer into what's going on into the application, but also having the expertise in understanding how to read this layer. And I think that many companies showed along the years that attackers knows what they're doing. They just need to hit one place, and we need to have this very granular ability and expertise to understand what they're doing. And I think application, requires a very, very specific visibility and mostly a very specific expertise in order to really differentiate the usuals from the actual attacks.
Perfect. Have it?
Yeah, so I agree with everything Daniel and Mick said, and I think that one of the things that we keep here, like not just in this question, but like during this panel, is that applications became more complex. Applications constantly change, and so is application security. And one of the things that ADR provides to the application security is empowering with its own SOC. Instead of like scanning code in isolation or reacting to threats in the edge, like ADR sits closely to the application. There are various ways of implementing it, and I'm sure that we'll touch that as well. And understanding eventually how the application is supposed to behave, create a baseline, and detect when those things don't happen. It connects to the code, it connects to the CI/CD, it connects to the live execution, it correlates everything, it creates the context, and it is able to empower eventually teams to be able to triage in real time, to respond to threats as they happen, and not just to theoretical risks.
Okay, sure. So we discussed about like cloud native and sort of AI, right? And so in general, you mentioned about it a lot. So with we understand the complexity, right, of the environment with the cloud and sort of AI native applications. So how ADR can actually like help organization or help team to fight against the new threats in this very complex environment. I think that is one of the things that organizations are very concerned about, especially for the AI, right? AI native application with all this kind of like a vibe coding and so like a AI generated application or AI generated code, right? So this is very, very relevant and very important questions I wanted to get to probably on this. Yeah.
I can go first if you want.
Perfect. Yeah.
So first, let's say I don't think we have still in the world like a clear definition to what this AI native application means. But like, let's assume for this, purpose of this discussion that when we're talking, I think about next gen cloud native applications and AI application, we're talking about applications that have components that were generated by AI, but mainly AI components that are part of the logic of the application itself, right? And I think that when you essentially added AI components to your application logic, essentially, we created an unpredictable by design applications because we are kind of crossing from the world of deterministic, there is a code, it needs to do something, going back to other solution you mentioned. I can look at the request and understand if it makes sense or not. We moved so-called the chasm to essentially creating anomalies by design. And if I'm looking at it from a request standpoint, from a Cisco standpoint, like other tools, I might see them as anomalies. But when you're actually looking into the application, understanding the actual workflows, they're not really an anomalies. It's just the new nature of what we called AI native application, next generation of cloud native applications. And I think the ADR ability essentially to see the execution flow end to end, to understand, okay, this request trigger this endpoint to dispatch this code to trigger this syscall, and understand the root cause for the anomaly, allow you to really differentiate the okay, because it's test noise. Like other tools will tell you it's not okay because they were not built to have this context inside. So they are not really anomalies. And differentiate this noise from the real anomalies, from the actual attacks that others might also miss. Like one of the things we're seeing, and I think that we're seeing this in multiple occasions recently, is that once you start introducing those, those things, so the actual attacks are also buried by so much noise that we don't only see a lot of false positive, but we're also seeing, because of the tweaking of the tools themselves, we're also losing some true positives that ADR, because of the granularity, can actually catch. And we're seeing this, with live data in actual customers.
Thanks, Daniel. Make or Avid.
Yeah. I can go. So I agree with what Daniel said, and like what makes the applications more complex and unpredictable is integrating AI components, but also using AI to change the application, using code generators, virtual code generators that are changing the pace, that are changing like what is being written, that can deploy new versions like just instantly. And the unique thing about ADR and how it actually enable engineering groups on board those tools and trust that their application is secured is by this continuous monitoring of the application. Continuous monitoring the data flows, continuous monitoring the execution flows, and making sure that we're able to monitor, to put the right guardrails, to put the right policies around what happens in the application, so we know exactly what happens and we're able to control that.
Yeah, and the interesting part, because I think we touched on it, like again, the application of AI has many sort of facets: the code generation, the embedded inside of your application, and then there's the adversary one too, which means now they're armed with this arsenal of things that can try new approaches. So I think we've seen this in some of the recent news. Like I believe we're going to see an uptick in novel attacks where CVEs aren't present. That means you're going to be caught off guard if you don't have a way to identify those in real time, right? The ability to actually know that attacks are occurring without having to just look for patterns of breaches actually occurring, because then you're 2 steps too late. And so the combination of those, and then one of the other areas of embedding, and Aviv, I think you just dabbled in this too, is the fact that when you embed it inside of your applications, the one that's become extremely interesting to me is this whole concept of agentic AI. I mean, the definition of agent is to do things on your behalf. Well, now you're giving permissions and control, and that non-deterministic nature of AI is actually being elevated to a whole nother layer, because you're giving permissions for applications with non-deterministic sort of capabilities to do brand new things that don't exist, right? The fact that agentic AI has Python interpreters where they can write code and execute it in real time doesn't exist inside of a repo that you can scan proactively and try to find these risks. You need, like, that by definition means you better have massive amounts of visibility and control of knowing what it's doing, how it's doing at any given time. And some of the security starts to help there with, looking for prompt injection, inspecting data that's going on. But those are just ingress and egress sort of approaches. They're not what's going on in here. And I've seen some pretty, like, this is the part that's always being in security. It's always intriguing. You see some pretty ingenious sort of approaches attackers are using. We've already started to see those where there was an attack embedded inside of a GitHub issue and they used MCP to send a request, and the attack was facilitated not by the prompt, but by what the AI was actually consuming as part of that process. And so all of these areas, like now you've got massive numbers of input coming in, you've got new approaches, you've got non-deterministic nature. You better have sort of control and visibility of what's actually occurring, or you're going to continue with this blind spot that's just going to be escalated, exposing you even more.
Yeah, I understand that. Thanks so much for the sharing, Nick, and Daniel, and Aviv. So yeah, we have like discussed about like as a definition the benefits of ADR, right, in the new era since an NG applications right now. But in reality, I think that like the first challenge for ADR is that it's still new term. The other thing is about the confusion. So like from your experience, can you like share with us a little bit about the key challenges that you find from your real conversation or like experience with your customers about the hurdle that where the organization from implementing the new technology like ADR or even like other thing. But I think that like in this scenario that talk about the ADR, what are the hurdles that who are back or preventing the organization from like implementing ADR? We heard, like from when I do the research, we heard about some like challenges in terms of innovation, right? And also like application instrumentation, because I think that is very, very like kind of like a big challenges for like implementing ADR at the large scale, right? So yeah, I wanted to hear from you, like from your experience about like all of this kind of hurdles, right, from ADR. Yeah.
Yeah, I can go. So when it comes to implementation, and I think that we've seen that also with like Rust, that like we can call it like a previous generation of like where ADR is today, that there are various ways of implementing it. And of course that each way has its own trade-offs, but we can see implementations that require like full code instrumentation that developers will need to like embed that and work on maintenance. And we see also like other technologies that can allow us, like eBPF, that requires like a tinier sensor, and even in an agentless way that we see today, like different solutions that provide these ADR capabilities and application monitoring capabilities in agentless way. I think that the key for a successful ADR implementation is understanding your use cases. What threats are you trying to detect? What threats are you trying to respond? Where should the data flow and how it will fit into your existing workflow? Do you have the buy-in from engineering groups in case you need it? And eventually, and I think that today the latest is that there is amazing technology and amazing solutions that can allow you onboard a solution in less than a couple of minutes.
That last part is the part that's very like intriguing and true, right? The fact that the implementation part, I don't think is really one of the barriers to entry in almost all these cases, especially compared against sort of historical approaches. I think one of the biggest struggles is this is a new market, right? Like there's implemented solutions that are in process that are pseudo working, depending upon your definition of effectivity. But like you have to have somebody that's looking to solve this problem differently. And it being a disruptive technology means you're disrupting something, right? And so you have to have somebody that's willing to explore, that wants to do this differently, that wants to do it effectively, that's looking or is scared of some of these new approaches or know that they can't handle that layer of risk that we've been talking about, or the contextual piece provides so much more impact and value. I think as we evolve and some of the compliance frameworks start, like this is also where compliance sometimes pushes this envelope, but compliance can't push it too far, because if nobody can adhere to it, then what good is the regulation? So I think there's sort of multiple facets. One is just the market starting to be aware that this exists, because once you pass that hurdle, then you have to start working with organizations that are like, we've got something that's working, it's good enough, we've got 30 other fires that we have to put out to sort of, we actually want to solve this better. We want to do it more effectively. We want to like stop wasting time of developers of fixing things that don't matter. We need to get ahead of novel threats that we know we're going to be on our heels because we're starting to get attacked. And with some of the latest breach reports, the fact that vulnerabilities have become the #1 attack vector over phishing attacks is also starting to illustrate that attackers are trying to utilize this sort of vector to solve those problems. So I think as we see more and more of that, we'll see this as this becomes today one of the more effective ways to actually start to solve those problems. And I think it'll start to drive sort of organizations to explore this area. Early adopters is definitely the one I think we're seeing most of the adoption happen. But I think as the success ticks up with all of our sort of customers having that, I think we'll see the market start to definitely sweep into ADR and using it, because it does provide a level of data that's not there.
Okay. Mick, I want to ask like a follow-up question here. You mentioned about it's not about the implementing, it's not about the challenges, but it's about the new market, right? But like we discussed about RASP, right? And RASP has been in the market for quite some time, but it didn't. I mean, like see the very strong adoption right now,
Yeah.
right? Because I think that the challenge is because like the need for the instrumentation, right? Applications instrumentation, right? And that because that would require a lot of resources, like developers and the security, right? And now when it comes to another technologies, a new technology for the application, they sort of like feel okay, do we need to do a lot of like instrumentation with or without like a agent or like with a code changing, or I hope and so on. So I think that is still there. So I think that it is be the responsibilities of like the vendors, like from Origo, from Maker, and also from Codium to explain to the audiences or to the organization that okay, we can overcome the challenges, right? And how ADR is different from the RASP, it's different from the like WAF, right? Into the implementing, into the maintenance and the operation, so that it can be, I mean, like providing more kind of values to the teams, not only the application, but also the SOC team as well, right?
Oh, no, sorry. I was just gonna say you're spot on, right? That user instrumentation, the overhead, the fact that if, like, again, historical approaches, if your RASP broke, it brought down your app too. Like, there were all of these barriers that were very, very scary. And in the new technology that I know all of us are using, like, makes that non-intrusive, makes it very lightweight overhead. Like, this is what's changing. This is why we're also spending a lot of time evangelizing it. And it's why I could probably, I'm sure I can speak for Aviv and Daniel. It's why we don't call ourselves RASP. Even by true definition of what we're creating is a runtime application security protection platform. It's just distinctively different than what RASP has been. So we don't call ourselves that on purpose, because it has some of that historical negative connotation and an inability to actually be effective.
Perfect. Nice.
So I think one thing, because I think that both kind of Aviv and Mick talked a lot about implementation. I think we're totally aligned on there as well. Like, I think a few years ago, we just couldn't do what these companies are doing today. Like, the introduction of VPF with the observability all along, that you can, kind of piggyback on, because you already have agents. You can take advantage of them. But I think that beyond implementation, I think one of the key challenges that organizations are facing is operationalization. Because I think that it's not just about how you get it in. It's also about how do you make it work as part of your, as we mentioned, it's part of an ecosystem. And I think that what we're seeing is that, there is something very scary for many organizations. And, we are talking with our customers and with our prospects on this, about even the ability to take this responsibility on shutting down the application. What if, okay, I understand you guys, you identify and detect the attack, but I don't want to be the one that essentially, shut down the application, because we all know that if your application is your business, your uptime is as important as your security, if not more. And I think that, this is a real challenge. I'll tell you that, for example, in our case, we understood that in order to overcome this challenge, ADR is one side of the table, but we introduced, for example, another solution, which is WAF Copilot. So we are saying, look, so instead of, we don't want to put the so-called operational risk on you to shut down the pod or shut down the application. How can we help you take the ADR context, what's happening in the application in runtime, and make your WAF much, much, much smarter? So I do think that there are, I would assume we will see more and more innovation coming from those places. I think that there is a huge challenge about how do you, just operationalize this. And I think we're managing to overcome it.
Perfect. Well, because with the time, I think that we have very interactive session, right? Now we have like a very limited time, so I think that we can go to with the final question, right? We talk a lot about the challenges, about the benefit of ADR, and also like how the ADR can help to like address all challenges in the application security in the cloud native and AI native environments. Now, I wanted to touch base on the point that how ADR can fit into like SecOps, right, on the SOC environment, right, to address more kind of like threat management. So, my question is how ADR can fit into the SOC and enhance modern SOC in the cloud native and AI native environment. This will be our last question from me, right? After that we turn it to like as a audience question if we have any incoming questions.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll dovetail my response actually into Daniel's, because this is operationalization, and it's also one I think I've started to see is the fact that I think there's going to be technology sometimes drives evolution inside organizations as well, because this idea of what we're starting to expose is a level of intelligence that hasn't existed. And sometimes like the SOC, and to Daniel's point, right? Like being able to understand mitigating controls inside of an application, you kind of need to know the code, you need to know the application. And that expertise doesn't necessarily exist. And even the responsibility or being the individual to hit that big red button to say, implement this control, which, you know, may or may not turn off business revenue, which is like the whole reason the application exists. So I think we're seeing sort of an evolution, and to Daniel's point too, right? Hitting and integrating with some of these additional technologies where you can easily start to implement some of those mitigating controls is a natural evolution associated with all of this. But it's also helping to facilitate, I think, sort of changes that we'll start to see. Like, will AppSec start to become more involved in the real-time runtime operations and integrate directly with SOC? Will SOC start to bring in those expertise associated with application? Will it bridge a gap between development? And interesting enough, like we've been exploring this, and we've gotten different answers from organizations of how they anticipate doing it, but it's intriguing to see. And so I think there will be an evolution associated with this, and how that operationalization of the data starts to change some of the structure inside of organizations to make it most effective.
I completely agree with Mick, and even want to add to that is that I think that we live in such an exciting time in application security that finally, I think that we're able to solve pains that were here for the last few decades in application development, in securing the applications themselves, and the usage of context, the ability to instrument the application, to generate context, to correlate it with every single point of data that we have from across the SDLC, gives us the opportunity to enrich teams, to enrich tools, to improve the decision making, to reduce the time to remediation, reduce triaging time, and everything that just empowers security teams, empowered like C-suite that lead security, knowing more about not just their infrastructure, but what are the actual applications, what do they do, how to govern them, same way that we want to govern people, that we want to govern infrastructure, that we want to govern processes.
So I think I totally agree with both. I think that, you know, at the bottom of this, I think also SecOps are having a change right now. You know, with the introduction of AI also enabling them with multiple things. So I think it's all about the ability to essentially, as we mentioned, create context and providing proactive actionability into the SOC itself. Because going back to the SOC is not, I don't think SOC will change the workflows. Like, they were optimized over many, many years, and now they're even being optimized more. It's about the ability to get this, I think, on the one side, a new stream of data that actually allows you to take action, which is following, you know, others that said that I think it wasn't there before, not in this granularity. No, now with, you know, the AI abilities of the SOC to actually take this granularity and make it into a decision. but also the ability to actually not just from the input perspective, but from the output perspective. So we mentioned the, the like combination with the WAF or other things, but essentially the ability to give the SOC the tools to act like a SOC should act. Because again, the SOC will not go to the developers and tell them to fix, but the SOC can create a mitigative control. And this is, I think, the next, like, this is what it's all about. It's about the ability to get in with the amazing things that organization already did with the SOC and are doing today with the SOC, with a very clear actionable input, but most importantly, with an actionable output that they can act on. Because, I think that the most frustrating thing for a SOC is to know about a problem and can't do anything about it. And I think the ability to get to do something about it and react, or proactively, not react, but like proactively take action is what it's all about.
I think another aspect of like how all of this new technology can get into SOC, because I think that that's because of the introduction of the Gen AI, right? With Gen AI, it's actually transformed the SOC operations now, and the SOC analysts do not need to. I mean, they can learn, right, about something for some applications code, or they do not need to have the knowledge about the application code or even the cloud with the Gen AI. So whenever an issue is flagged, they can actually go into the Gen AI and sort of get the very quick answer, right? Understand what is behind the issue, right, with the Gen AI. So it's actually transforming how the SOC analyst is working, right, with all the issues, the alert, right, from either the application or the workload or the cloud layer. Okay, so thank you so much for all the sharing, right, and this very interactive, very interesting discussion. So that's my last question. So that's all the time we have today. All right, thank you so much, Meg, Daniel, and Avi, for a very, very insightful conversation, right? And to our audience, if you found today's session valuable, please share it with your peers. And if you have any question, feel free to reach out to us, right? And don't forget to check out our calendar for the next session in Frost Relevant Cybersecurity webinar series. All right, till then, thank you so much and take care.